Mick wouldn't have had you gone there in the first place, because Mick doesn't like yesterday.
For decades, Charlie Watts was the steady, beating heart of the Rolling Stones. But when the rock icon passed away, fans were shocked to discover his legendary bandmates didn't attend his funeral. The sudden absence of Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, and Ronnie Wood immediately sparked rumors of a bitter, hidden feud ripping the group apart behind closed doors. So what dark truth kept the Stones from saying their final goodbyes to their lifelong brother? Join us as we uncover the truth behind why they skipped the service. How Charlie Watts went from post-war London to rock and roll immortality. Long before Charlie Watts became the quiet force holding together one of the biggest rock bands in history, he was just a young boy growing up in post-war London, surrounded by uncertainty, ordinary struggles, and a love for music that would eventually change his life forever. The world would come to know him as the calm, steady heartbeat of the Rolling Stones. But before the fame, sold-out stadiums, and decades of rock and roll history, Charlie's story began in a much simpler place, with a childhood shaped by family, friendship, and a deep connection to the sounds that would guide his future. Charles Robert Watts was born on June 2, 1941, at University College Hospital in Bloomsbury, London, during a time when the city was still living through the shadow of World War II. His father, Charles Richard Watts, worked as a lorry driver for the London, Midland, and Scottish Railway, while his mother, Lillian Charlotte Watts, worked in a factory. Charlie grew up alongside his younger sister Linda, and the two shared a close bond throughout their childhood. The Watts family lived in Wembley, at a time when many neighborhoods were still recovering from the destruction caused by wartime bombings. Like many families around them, they lived in a small, prefabricated home built during the rebuilding period after the war. Although Charlie was very young during those years, he would later remember hearing explosions nearby and rushing with his family to air raid shelters. But unlike many who lived through that period, Charlie remembered the war almost like a distant childhood adventure, rather than a time filled with fear. It was during those early years in Wembley that Charlie formed a friendship that would quietly shape his musical journey. In 1946, he met his next-door neighbor, Dave Green, and the two became lifelong friends. Their shared love for music began when they discovered old 78 RPM records together, spending hours listening to jazz recordings in Charlie's bedroom. While many children were drawn to the popular sounds of the time, Charlie found himself fascinated by jazz legends like Jelly Roll Morton and Charlie Parker. His friend Dave would later recall that Charlie always seemed one step ahead, collecting records and discovering new sounds before anyone else. That curiosity and appreciation for music became the foundation of the musician he would eventually become. After the family moved to Kingsbury, Charlie attended Tyler's Croft Secondary Modern School, where his talents stretched beyond music. He showed an interest in art, football, and cricket. But it was the drums that slowly began capturing his attention. His first attempt at creating his own instrument came in an unusual way. After buying a banjo, he removed the neck because he didn't enjoy playing it. And after hearing jazz drummer Chico Hamilton, he became determined to recreate that same style and rhythm. In 1955, Charlie received his first drum kit as a Christmas gift, costing just $12, and he began practicing along with the jazz records he had collected. For the young boy from Wembley, drumming was no longer just a hobby. It was becoming a passion. After finishing school, Charlie studied at Harrow Art School, where he developed his skills in design. When he graduated, he began working as a graphic designer for an advertising company while continuing to play drums whenever he could. Alongside Dave Green, he started performing with local jazz groups, including the Joe Jones All-Stars, marking the beginning of his journey into music. At first, Charlie struggled with the transition from jazz to rhythm and blues, but everything changed when he met musician Alexis Korner in 1961. Korner invited him to join his band, Blues Incorporated, giving Charlie the opportunity to play regularly while still maintaining his job in advertising. What started as a young boy's fascination with jazz records in a small bedroom would eventually lead Charlie Watts to become one of the most respected drummers in music history. But at the time, he had no idea that these early steps were leading him toward the band that would change his life forever. How Charlie Watts became the Rolling Stones' secret weapon. By the early 1960s, Charlie Watts had already built a life around music, but he had no idea that one unexpected opportunity would place him at the center of a cultural revolution. While he was still playing with Alexis Korner's Blues Incorporated and balancing his career as a graphic designer, Charlie crossed paths with a group of young musicians who were beginning to create a sound that would soon take the world by storm. Among them were Brian Jones, Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, and Ian "Stu" Stewart, the future members of the Rolling Stones. Charlie first met the group in 1962 through the London rhythm and blues scene, a world filled with smoky clubs, passionate musicians, and a growing hunger for something different. At first, joining the band was not an easy decision. Charlie already had steady work and a reliable income from his music gigs, while the young Rolling Stones were still struggling to make enough money to pay their members. But despite the uncertainty, something about the group's energy and direction convinced him to take the chance. In January 1963, Charlie officially agreed to become the drummer for the Rolling Stones. A few weeks later, on February 2nd, he made his first public appearance as a permanent member at the Ealing Jazz Club. It was the beginning of a partnership that would last for nearly 6 decades. Unlike many rock stars who chased attention and fame, Charlie was never interested in being the loudest person in the room. He was the quiet one, the steady presence behind the chaos, and even Mick Jagger would jokingly introduce him during concerts as the Wembley Whammer. But behind that calm personality was a musician whose talent was impossible to replace. Charlie's creativity also extended far beyond the drum kit. Before the world knew him as the backbone of the Rolling Stones, he had a passion for art and design. He contributed graphic artwork and comic illustrations to some of the band's early records, including the sleeve design for Between the Buttons. His artistic eye later helped shape the visual identity of several major Rolling Stones tours. One of his most memorable creative moments came in 1975 when the band announced their upcoming tour in New York City in a way nobody expected. Instead of holding a traditional press conference, the Stones surprised reporters by performing Brown Sugar on the back of a flatbed truck as it moved through Manhattan traffic. For Charlie, it was not just a publicity stunt. He saw it as a tribute to the old New Orleans jazz bands that used similar methods to promote their performances. For decades, Charlie remained the only drummer many fans could imagine behind the Rolling Stones' legendary sound. He never missed a concert during his time with the band, appearing on every album alongside Mick Jagger and Keith Richards. His final live performance with the group came on August 30th, 2019, at Hard Rock Stadium in Miami, marking the end of an incredible run. But even while his name became forever connected to rock and roll, Charlie's heart always belonged to jazz. Away from the Rolling Stones, he continued exploring the music that first inspired him as a child. He released jazz projects, honored legendary musicians like Charlie Parker, and worked with some of the most respected artists across jazz, rock, and rhythm and blues. In the late 1970s, he joined Ian Stewart in the boogie-woogie group Rocket 88. And throughout the 1980s and 1990s, he performed with his own jazz ensembles, including the Charlie Watts Orchestra and Charlie Watts Quintet. His love for jazz never faded, and he often described his projects as a way of capturing the feeling and spirit of the musicians who influenced him. Even after decades of fame, Charlie Watts remained the same person who once sat in a bedroom listening to old jazz records with a childhood friend. Whether behind the drum kit for the Rolling Stones or leading his own jazz groups, he never chased the spotlight. He simply followed the music, and that quiet dedication is exactly what made his legacy so unforgettable. Charlie Watts' legendary clash with Mick Jagger. For decades, Charlie Watts was known as the calm, collected heartbeat of the Rolling Stones. While Mick Jagger commanded the stage and Keith Richards became famous for his rebellious lifestyle, Charlie remained the quiet force holding everything together. He rarely chased attention, rarely involved himself in controversy, and seemed like the one person in the band who could always keep his balance. But behind that peaceful image were moments of tension, personal struggles, and battles that even his closest friends never expected. One of the most surprising stories from inside the Rolling Stones involved a confrontation between Charlie and Mick Jagger. It was a moment that seemed almost impossible to imagine. The quiet drummer, known for his patience and professionalism, had reached a breaking point with the band's legendary frontman. According to Keith Richards' autobiography, Life, the disagreement began during a period when tensions were rising within the group. Richards claimed that Jagger's growing confidence had started to affect the way he viewed his role in the band. During a conversation about the future of the Rolling Stones, Jagger allegedly made a comment that deeply offended Charlie, telling him that none of the issues mattered because he was only my drummer. For someone else, the comment might have been ignored. But Charlie Watts had spent decades proving that he was far more than just a person sitting behind a drum kit. He had been there through the highs, the lows, the tours, and the changes that shaped the band's history. The tension reportedly reached its peak when a drunken Jagger later called Charlie and asked, "Where's my drummer?" What happened next became one of the most talked about moments in Rolling Stones history. Richards recalled that Charlie was staying in the same hotel, only a short distance away from Jagger. Instead of immediately reacting, Charlie calmly prepared himself. He shaved, put on one of his tailored Savile Row suits, sprayed on cologne, and walked down the hallway to Jagger's room. According to Richards' account, Charlie entered the room, walked past him without saying a word, grabbed Jagger by his jacket, and punched him. He then reportedly made it clear that he never wanted to be called his drummer again. The story became legendary because it showed a side of Charlie that fans rarely saw, a man who was quiet, but who also had a strong sense of pride and respect. But while Charlie's famous confrontation with Jagger showed his strength, another battle in his life happened far away from the spotlight. Unlike the wild image often associated with the Rolling Stones, Charlie spent much of his career trying to stay grounded. However, during the 1980s, he went through a difficult period involving alcohol and drug problems. Charlie later described that time as a kind of midlife crisis. His struggles reportedly became worse between 1983 and 1986, affecting his health and changing the way his family saw him. His daughter once described how different he looked during that period, showing just how serious things had become. Unlike some of his bandmates, Charlie had never embraced that lifestyle, but he found himself caught in a difficult situation. Fortunately, with support from people close to him, including Keith Richards, he was able to turn his life around. Richards, despite his own history with addiction, recognized that his friend needed help and encouraged him to make a change. Charlie also had another powerful reason to fight back against those habits: his wife, Shirley. Their marriage had been affected by his struggles, and after breaking his ankle during a performance in 1986, Charlie decided to walk away from drugs and alcohol completely. From that point forward, he never returned to that lifestyle. The man who had survived decades inside one of the most unpredictable bands in music history found his way back to the person he had always been: disciplined, thoughtful, and focused on the music. Behind the quiet smile and perfectly tailored suits was a man who faced his own battles, stood up for himself, and proved that strength does not always have to be loud. The Secret Life of Charlie Watts, away from the Rolling Stones. While the Rolling Stones became famous for their wild image, endless tours, and larger-than-life personalities, Charlie Watts always lived by a completely different set of rules. Behind the scenes, the legendary drummer was not interested in the attention, the parties, or the reputation that followed the band everywhere they went. Instead, Charlie valued privacy, loyalty, and a quiet life away from the chaos surrounding rock and roll fame. That was clear from the very beginning of his marriage to Shirley Shepherd. In 1964, after the Rolling Stones had started gaining attention with early hits like "Come On" and "I Wanna Be Your Man," Charlie quietly married his art student girlfriend. But in true Charlie fashion, he kept the news almost completely to himself. The drummer was so concerned that his marriage might affect the band's image with their young female fans that he barely told anyone. Even his fellow band members and the group's manager, Andrew Loog Oldham, were reportedly among the last to find out. At the time, Charlie was still sharing a party-filled apartment in Chelsea with Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, and Brian Jones. But while his bandmates were embracing the rock star lifestyle, Charlie was already searching for something more stable. After the Stones began finding success, he moved into an apartment overlooking Regent's Park and built a life that existed far away from the spotlight. Unlike many musicians of that era, Charlie remained devoted to Shirley throughout their marriage. While the world often associated the Rolling Stones with excess and temptation, Charlie refused to let fame change his values. He consistently turned down attention from groupies while the band was on the road and remained committed to his family. During the band's famous 1972 American tour, documented in Robert Greenfield's STP, A Journey Through America with the Rolling Stones, the group was invited to the Playboy Mansion. While others enjoyed the party atmosphere, Charlie chose a much quieter activity, spending time in the game room rather than joining in the celebration around him. Charlie himself once admitted that he never fit the traditional image of a rock star. He joked that even trying to grow a beard with fellow bandmate Bill Wyman in the 1970s felt exhausting. For Charlie, the idea of living recklessly was never appealing. Music was his passion, but it was never meant to consume every part of his life. Charlie and Shirley welcomed their daughter, Serafina, in 1968. Although she later lived much of her adult life away from the spotlight, she remained an important part of Charlie's world. Through her, Charlie eventually became a grandfather to Charlotte, his only grandchild. Even his hobbies reflected the thoughtful and unique person he was. Starting in 1968, Charlie began drawing sketches of every bed he slept in while touring with the Rolling Stones. What began as a simple habit became a personal diary of his life on the road. Charlie explained that he continued the sketches because missing one would feel like leaving a piece of his journey unfinished. Each drawing captured a moment in time, creating a quiet record of the thousands of nights he spent traveling the world. When Charlie Watts passed away at the age of 80, the music world mourned the loss of a true original. Tributes poured in from legendary musicians, including Ringo Starr and Bruce Springsteen's longtime drummer Max Weinberg, who remembered him not only as an incredible musician, but as a kind and respected person. Charlie Watts spent nearly 6 decades behind the drums of the Rolling Stones, but his greatest legacy was not just the music he created, it was the way he lived, with humility, loyalty, and a quiet strength that never needed attention to be noticed. Charlie Watts, Life After Fame, the legend who never changed. When the world lost Charlie Watts on August 24, 2021, rock and roll lost one of its most respected and quietly influential figures. The legendary Rolling Stones drummer passed away peacefully in a London hospital at the age of 80, surrounded by his family. His publicist, Bernard Doherty, described him as a cherished husband, father, grandfather, and one of the greatest drummers of his generation. For nearly 6 decades, Charlie Watts had been the steady heartbeat behind the Rolling Stones. While Mick Jagger became known for his unforgettable stage presence, and Keith Richards became famous for his rebellious image, Charlie always stood apart. He never seemed interested in becoming a celebrity. For him, the music was always more important than the fame that came with it. When he joined the Rolling Stones in 1963, he never expected the band to become a global phenomenon. In his own words, it started as just another job. He was waiting to begin another career when the band's success changed everything. Decades later, he had become one of the most admired musicians in history, building a legacy and a fortune estimated in the hundreds of millions. But despite being part of one of the biggest bands in the world, Charlie managed to avoid much of the chaos that followed his bandmates. He preferred a quiet life away from the spotlight, focusing on his family, his art, and his love for jazz. In the final months of his life, Charlie faced health challenges that forced him to step away from the Rolling Stones' 2021 U.S. tour. In August 2021, the band announced that Charlie had undergone an unspecified medical procedure that was successful but required time for rest and recovery. Charlie accepted the decision, even though stepping away from the stage was not easy. In a statement, he apologized to fans who had been waiting for the tour and explained that he did not want them to experience another delay or cancellation. It was a reflection of the same dedication he had shown throughout his career. His final live performance with the Rolling Stones came on August 30, 2019, in Miami. When the band eventually returned to the stage, longtime musician Steve Jordan stepped in behind the drums, but fans knew something would always be missing. Charlie Watts was not just the drummer of the Rolling Stones, he was part of the band's identity. Throughout his life, Charlie also faced serious health battles. In 2004, he was diagnosed with throat cancer after doctors discovered a tumor. Having quit smoking years earlier, Charlie underwent treatment and eventually went into remission. Although doctors were optimistic, Charlie admitted that the diagnosis frightened him deeply, believing at first that cancer meant his life was coming to an end. Thankfully, he recovered, and later said he felt incredibly fortunate that the illness had been discovered early. The experience reminded him how quickly life could change, and how important it was to appreciate every moment. Despite his fame, Charlie never embraced the traditional rock star lifestyle. He openly admitted that he had no interest in being a pop idol or having people scream his name. He cared about playing music, not becoming a celebrity. While other band members enjoyed the attention that came with fame, Charlie often returned to his hotel room alone after concerts. He even developed a unique habit of sketching every bed he slept in while touring, creating a personal diary of his life on the road. Later in life, Charlie lived quietly in the English countryside with his wife, Shirley, far away from the constant attention of the public. He spent his final years the same way he had lived much of his life, peacefully, privately, and surrounded by the things that mattered most. Charlie Watts may have been the quietest member of the Rolling Stones, but his impact was impossible to ignore. He never needed the spotlight to prove his importance. His music, his loyalty, and his timeless rhythm ensured that his legacy would live forever. The real reason the Rolling Stones couldn't say goodbye to Charlie Watts. For more than 5 decades, Charlie Watts was the steady heartbeat behind the Rolling Stones. He stood beside Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, and Ronnie Wood through some of the biggest moments in rock history, from legendary tours to record-breaking performances around the world. But when the time came to say goodbye to the man who had helped define the band's sound, his closest bandmates were nowhere to be seen. Charlie Watts was laid to rest in a private funeral ceremony in Devon, England, in 2021. However, Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, and Ronnie Wood were unable to attend. Their absence immediately left many fans wondering why the three remaining members of the Rolling Stones were not there to honor the drummer who had been their musical partner for nearly 60 years. The reason was not a hidden feud or a falling out within the band. Instead, circumstances outside their control kept them away. At the time of Charlie's funeral, the bandmates were in the United States preparing for their rescheduled tour. Due to COVID-19 travel restrictions and the challenges surrounding international travel, they were unable to return to the United Kingdom in time. The musicians were reportedly in Boston, while Charlie's family and close friends gathered for the small private service in Devon. It was a heartbreaking situation for a band that had spent more than half a century together, but the circumstances made it impossible for them to be there physically. The Rolling Stones had already announced earlier in 2021 that Charlie would not be joining them for their upcoming tour due to health concerns. Steve Jordan was brought in to take over drumming duties while the band prepared to return to the stage. But just weeks later, the world received the devastating news that Charlie Watts had passed away. On August 24, 2021, Charlie died at the age of 80 at the Royal Brompton Hospital in Chelsea, London, with his family by his side. His publicist released a statement announcing the loss of the legendary musician, saying that he had passed away peacefully in a London hospital, surrounded by his loved ones. Charlie's death came after years of health challenges. In 2004, he was diagnosed with throat cancer after discovering a lump on the left side of his neck. Doctors confirmed the tumor was malignant, and he underwent treatment that included surgery and intensive radiotherapy. Thankfully, he recovered, and later said he felt incredibly lucky that doctors had caught the illness early. Despite the loss, the Rolling Stones made sure Charlie's contribution was never forgotten. Shortly after his death, the band shared an emotional tribute featuring photographs and footage from throughout his life and career. The tribute reminded fans of the man behind the drums, the musician who helped create the unmistakable sound of one of the greatest bands in history. When the band eventually returned to touring, they honored Charlie's memory on stage, paying tribute to the drummer who had been there from the beginning. Although Steve Jordan stepped in behind the kit, everyone understood that Charlie Watts could never truly be replaced. Beyond his role in the Rolling Stones, Charlie's legacy continued to grow after his passing. Musicians across generations praised his talent, humility, and unique approach to drumming. He was widely regarded as one of the greatest drummers of all time, not because he demanded attention, but because he understood exactly what the music needed. Charlie Watts was never the loudest member of the Rolling Stones, but he was always one of the most important. His funeral may have been missing 3 familiar faces, but the love and respect for him were clear around the world. The band that he helped build continued carrying his legacy forward, proving that even after his final beat, Charlie Watts remained an irreplaceable part of rock and roll history. What Rolling Stones song is your favorite till this very day? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.